I was born in Washington, D.C.
And in what year?
1915.
Tell us about your parents in terms of their economical backgrounds
Well,
and educational and economical backgrounds.
well, my mother was the daughter of ex-slaves, and they had 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, and they sent them through the highest education they could get. The boys went to what's now Johnson C. Smith. They're from North Carolina. Johnson C. Smith University. And the girls went to Scotia Seminary it was then. And my mother came to Washington to help a relative with her dressmaking. She had a dressmaking business. And she met my father. My father's mother was a slave. She didn't know anything about it. She was a little girl when her uncle brought her to Washington. And he had to buy all the seats in one of the cars in order to ride on the train. It was somewhere in Virginia, not far from Washington. Her uncle. And my father taught, I don't know how much he studied, because he died before I was born.
I see.
But he taught at Tuskegee, arithmetic, and I don't know what else with Booker T. Washington and Dr. Carver. And then he came back to Washington and taught in the high school.
I see. Which high school?
Armstrong.
Armstrong High School. And your mother, what did she do?
My mother, when my father died, my mother, she wasn't prepared to teach in Washington since she had graduated from a seminary. But she had a job scrubbing floors and waiting on hanging coats up in a club at night. And she had a cousin in Washington who was a surgeon. And other people decided that was terrible. And they got her a job as a public school attendance officer. We lived in Northwest Washington, where most of the African Americans who were in more or less medium circumstances lived. There were some slums around the area where the Capitol was, where they lived, and also in southwest Washington. And the rest of Washington was white.
But your environment was middle income?
Yeah.
African American, of course, because that was during segregation.
We lived in a house that my grandfather built.
I see.
He didn't build it, he bought it with my grandmother. We didn't go into the white area except to shop or on special occasions like the 4th of July to see the fireworks at the Washington Monument, things like that. Or to Rock Creek Park at Easter time.
Yes, to hunt for the Easter eggs.
Well, we went to the movies on U Street, and we went to school in that area.
And of course, your primary and high schools were segregated too.
Oh yeah, I went to Lucretia Mott Elementary School and Dunbar High School, which is a very famous high school.
Yes,
was. And with my mother also, well, there was an African, the way I heard her story, she stayed with us one winter after my grandfather died. They had a farm in North Carolina. And there was an African student who would come and sit. He would say, "Let me sit at your feet, grandmother, and tell me about slavery." And she would tell him different things, and I would sit and listen. And later on when I was but because she had more time then, but we always went to stay with my grandfather and my grandmother on their farm in the summertime. And she was busy, really busy, all the time. But later on, when my grandfather died and she lived by herself, she would sometimes tell me things. No, it would upset me terribly.
Maybe the beginning of your...
Especially with the contrast between what I saw of black people during that period in films and what my grandmother would say. They were house slaves. Both my grandfather worked with the horses that people rode. They were young when slavery finished.
I understand they were about 18 years old when they
Somewhere
were
around
freed.
there.